So welcome to Star Wars and Conflict Resolution book launch. We are thrilled to have editors and some of the chapter authors with us today. And I will let them introduce themselves, but I do want to thank Noam Ebner, who's a fellow of our center, and Jen Reynolds for being courageous to put this book into the public domain and help lead us forward into the 21st and 22nd century. My name is Leah Wing, and I'm the director of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. And I'm excited to hear what you're going to share about this book. Thank you. Noam.
You're on mute.
Someone had to do it, and now we've gotten it out of the way.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Leah, and I want to thank the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution for hosting us for this launch. And while we're at it, for hosting my work for so long as a fellow, my work in negotiation and conflict resolution, and it's online in technological assisted manifestations. I could not imagine a more supportive group of colleagues than the fellows of the center. Some of them are online. Some of them have been putting up with me talking about Star Wars for years. So whether this has been about technology or about other stuff, you've been so incredibly supportive. And Leah, anything catch in organizing this launch. We are so grateful. Thank you. Not that Star Wars and conflict resolution is entirely beyond the realm of technology and dispute resolution. We can all, when we think Star Wars, we can all cast back to that first image we have in mind of a flickering woman in white in a hologram saying, "Help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only choice." And what she's essentially doing when you think about that from a conflict perspective, you have a party to a conflict who's using technology to send an image with a message to a potential ally who she's trying to negotiate to rejoin the cause, and to enlist him and his aid against the other party. And what she's asking him to do is to transport another bit of technology, the droids, specifically R2-D2, because the information contained in that droid will hopefully assist in combating yet another piece of technology, the Death Star, which is, even Darth Vader called it a technological terror. So even just sort of those beginning pivotal moments and iconic pivotal moments have loads of the merge between technology, conflict, and its resolution. Resolution isn't so much in the air yet, but give it time. And we'll be discussing some other merges of those topics as we go along today. We have lots to talk about in all areas of technology related, non-technology related, but for this launch hosted by the National Center, we're going to focus on some technology related conflict and resolution ideas. The book itself is broader. It looks beyond technology. It looks at everything we know about conflict, about negotiation, about resolution of conflict, and applies it to the Star Wars movies. So we're looking at, what is ordinarily we look at as conversations, arguments, fights, lightsaber duels, X-wing battles, and all of that in Star Wars. And we look at that through what we know about conflict dynamics, conflict escalation, conflict transformation, the role of emotions in conflict, what goes right in conflict, and what is sticky about conflict, and then the processes for addressing, managing, engaging, and resolving conflict, negotiation, mediation, and so on. Why? Why do any of this? So Jen and I have wanted to do this for the longest time. I'm talking decades, ever since my first mediation course 100 years ago. Partly for fun, and partly because it's such a natural connection. There are so many things in Star Wars that could be helpful examples. And so, of course, over the years, we've both brought lots of those into class to the point where our students have been rolling our eyes. And here's a shout out to all of our students who put up with that. But over time, we've also realized that when we wanted to do it for real, we want to do it for a different reason. It's beyond fun, although fun is an important part of all this. And that reason is because another overarching goal that we, and I know that many people in the negotiation, conflict resolution, ADR fields have, is this idea of how can we spread this out to the public? We all know that this stuff is helpful in so many realms. It's not just helpful to us because our students are lawyers who will avoid court this way. And it's not just helpful because it'll help people, it'll help our students negotiate better deals as business leaders. It's helpful because it's helpful, because this is how we negotiate our way around the world. And we all know that. And everybody says, you know, everybody should know some of that. And I think every teacher and every practitioner and everybody who's active in this field does some of that, expanding the message beyond our classrooms, beyond our training rooms. But still, there are 8 billion out there, 8 billion people out there, and that's a lot. And you know, in a good year, I teach a couple of hundred students, and in a good year where I'm doing a lot of training, I teach a couple of thousand people, whatever. That's like the largest numbers I get. But if we want to touch everyone, we need to find a different path. And the pathway we're choosing in this book, and hopefully in other projects to follow, is the notion of taking phenomena that have existing audiences, pop culture phenomena that have pre-existing audiences of hundreds of millions of people, perhaps, such as Star Wars. These people might never open a book on negotiation or never open a book on conflict. They would never see the point, and even if they did see the point, they probably wouldn't often buy the book, invest, and actually sit down to read it. But we're hoping that by writing a book about the thing that they love and they live, and when I say they, I'm also saying we, including some of those on this call who tend a little more to the Star Wars fanish nerd types. We know who some of you are. We don't know all of you. We're assuming that there are many out there. We're hoping that they'll sit down to read some of this book, and along the way, they'll realize why these notions of conflict are helpful to them. And they'll gain conflict fluency through reading this book about Star Wars. So that's our mission. We realized, Jen and I realized we weren't enough, so we decided to do our first book as a multi-author edited book. 25 authors, all in all, participated in this book. Some of them are here on this call. Aaron and Jason will be speaking with us later on. I saw Ty and Elizabeth Spradley before. There they are, and they come from all fields, the breadth of the conflict fields, law, psychology, leadership, you know, the whole gamut that we always say our field is drawn for. And they all came together to write a book about Star Wars. And then we started looking for a publisher. Jen, what happened then?
Hi, everyone. So thanks so much to Leah and Ethan and the Center for hosting us today. I'm Jen Reynolds. I'm from the University of Oregon. I'm so grateful to see everybody here. Very happy to have Jason and Aaron with us. Thrilling to see Ty and Elizabeth Spradley in the group. Their chapter on conflict escalation is incredible in our book. So before we talk more about the book itself, although you've heard some about it now, we wanted to extend our heartfelt thanks to our publisher, Sharon Press, along with all of the fabulous people at DRI Press for her support of this work. Sharon, as many of you know, is an ADR luminary, and she teaches at Mitchell-Hamline. She is a prolific researcher, a brilliant writer. She's a gifted teacher and practitioner. She directs the Dispute Resolution Institute and its press. And so we wanted to be sure before we got too much more into the book to give her a chance to say a few words before we get started. Sharon, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much, first to Leah and the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution. It's super exciting to be invited to be part of this launch. And I will say that as the publisher, when Noam and Jen decided that DRI Press would be the publisher for this book, I was absolutely thrilled. I will say a couple more words about how we choose what we choose to publish, but I have known that this has been a dream of theirs. And so it was just super exciting to be part of fulfilling the dream of that Jen and Noam had. And I will say that they were a dream to work with, as were the authors that are featured in the publication. So DRI Press was founded in 2009, and the idea behind the press was not to make money, but actually, which I'm very good at figuring out ways not to make money, just so everyone knows. My specialty is how not to make money, much to my husband's chagrin. But the press really was founded with this idea that there were important work around conflict resolution, negotiation, and the full gamut that really weren't getting out there and weren't accessible to people around the world. And so DRI Press was created, actually initiated by my predecessor as director of the Institute, Jim Coben, who many of you know. And it started with our Rethinking Negotiation Teaching project. And I just dropped into the chat the link to our open access page, because that's very much a part of what DRI Press is about. Yes, we sell our books on Amazon and sometimes in other ways. But we also try to make them accessible for free chapter by chapter downloads. And so on the open access link that I provided to you, you can get to not only the Rethinking Negotiation Teaching, those 4 volumes, but also Risk and Rigor, that was published, that was written by Marjorie Aaron, The Other Side of the Door on a restorative practice kind of way of dealing with policing, notes from our symposium that we did on community engagement, and then the recent publication on personal histories and conflict resolution, evolution of the field, that Nancy and Howard wrote or collected the stories on. Jen and Noam, we have an interesting arrangement with them. It is initially available at a very, very reasonable price for people to purchase, and then eventually it will also go on open access as well. But we wanted to give people the opportunity to purchase it. And if you haven't purchased a copy, strongly encourage you to do so. It is a fabulous publication, and we're super proud to be associated with it. And with that, I'm not going to take any more time, but then to throw it back to the authors to share a little bit of their work. Thanks.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm getting the best thing I can do now is sort of deflect and point the spotlight at someone else, or it's just going to be me blushing for the next I don't know how long. So what I want to do now, is beyond saying what a joy it has been to work with you, Sharon, and with DRI Press, is to introduce two of our authors, and we chose their chapter. We chose their chapter because, like the topics we'll be speaking about today, it's a little closer to the core, not only mission of the National Center for Technology and Dispute Resolution, but also to the things that tend to be on fellows' minds and on the agendas that they look into and write about and think about. Jason Kaufman and Aaron Peterson wrote a chapter about empathy. Or they wrote a chapter about droids, the robots in Star Wars. Or they wrote a chapter about one droid's journey towards achieving increasingly higher levels of empathy, and how it put those higher levels of empathy to work in engaging conflict. I hope that was both the right summary and the right one that sort of ties it into the things we're thinking about right now when we think about technology and dispute resolution. I mean, we've been thinking about artificial intelligence and how it will affect dispute resolution for a long, long time. but particularly, of course, over the course of the past 2 months, when everybody has been thinking about Chat-GPT and other clones of it, sort of how much is enough, how much is too much. We've been talking about this. When I say we, I really mean the center and Ethan and Colin and Dan and others have been talking about, and Leah have been talking about for 25 plus years. But something that's coming in a rush, first during the COVID period and now during this new wave. And one of the questions that's always on everyone's mind is, what can artificial intelligence not provide? Or what do we think it can't provide? And Aaron and Jason's chapter really taps into that. The human elements that a droid had to learn. So it's very, very relevant to today. I'll introduce Jason and Aaron. Jason is a professor of educational leadership at Minnesota State University at Moorhead. So he comes from the educational leadership field, which is, if you're wondering how many fields inform the field of conflict resolution, the answer is always going to be more than you think. He's the director of the IRB board at the university. He's a psychologist. He looks into mind-body interventions and how they promote human wellness and academic success. He also, surprise, surprise, has another side, although I hope he's merged them successfully. He also is a co-host of the Dyson Mind podcast, which originated in gaming and fantasy gaming, role-playing, D&D, and which goes down into other rabbit holes, such as Star Trek and Star Wars. And thank you, Jen. Not Moorhead, Mankato, I apologize. And he wrote this chapter together with Aaron Peterson, who is also an active researcher and an assistant professor, a former assistant professor of educational leadership and student affairs at Minnesota State University Moorhead. He looks into conflict engagement in higher education, including both amongst leadership students and also in the private sector. He obtained both his master's degree in conflict resolution and his doctorate in educational leadership at Creighton. So, go Jays!
Just my master's degree, no.
My apologies. I'm taking credit for more than we deserve.
That's all right.
Okay. And we're thrilled to have you with us. We're going to ask you to introduce your chapter in a little while, but before that, and separate from that, would you like to jump in and say anything you'd like about this process, about being a part of this team?
Having a chance to work with my friend and colleague Jason, that has just been a phenomenal experience, and we learned a lot in the process. Having a chance to work with Noam and Jen, kind of leading this, and simultaneously, Jason and I have been working on our own book, and so having a chance to be invited to submit a chapter for a project like this on Star Wars and conflict. I mean, how can you not be excited about that? But just the amount of learning that I have had just to be a part of something like this and to be with, I feel kind of, I'm not sure exactly what the right word is, but the brilliant, truly brilliant people that collaborate to put this together. I just feel extremely humbled to be part of it. So, Jason, I don't know if you have anything that.
I just agree. Thank you, everybody, for having us. It's lovely to be here, and it's amazing that we get to play in spaces like this chat, the book, where we can kind of try to actualize ourselves very, very holistically with all these things we love, and somehow they intersect, and we can still look at ourselves in the morning and say, yes, I'm a professional. So this is outstanding.
Yes, and on that note, just because more, what's your own upcoming book on?
I'll just say you're the lead author on that one, Jason. But so we have a book coming out probably towards the end of this year, and it is about, we're using the backdrop of Star Trek, another great, and we're looking at some of the main captains through the different genres of Star Trek, and we're looking at leadership holistically. specifically as it pertains to 3 leadership traits that Jason and I have kind of honed in on in our research of communication, patience, and relationship, a lot of which certainly intersects in the exploration of conflict too. And so from my standpoint, there's definitely a lot of that sprinkled into the book, along with some more holistic ideas. But no, having a chance to, another reason why this project was so fun is to use a different genre of space sci-fi, and to do them both was almost kind of like being able a chance to switch off and use both sides of your brain, and stay engaged. And so it was, yeah, a lot of fun. Anything else you want to add to that too, Jason?
Well, it's very inclusive of you to be a Star Trek and a Star Wars person. Yes. So in the grand tradition of launch events, we are going to do some readings from our chapters. These are going to be pretty short. It's each of us is going to take no more than 5 minutes to just give you a sense of what our chapters are about. And then the plan is, I mean, I don't know how the time is all going to work out, but the plan is that we can then have a short conversation about the topic that Noam was introducing earlier about the contested status of droids in Star Wars societies. It seems like kind of a relevant subject matter for this particular forum. So, and of course, we welcome any questions or comments that you have. With that, I think we're going to start with Noam, and then I will go, and then Aaron and Jason.
Okay, great. Thanks, Jen. So my chapter is a chapter that the Star Wars side of it, it looks at the notion, everybody in Star Wars keeps telling each other what their destiny is, right? They keep, no, you must join our side, it is your destiny. Loads of destiny talk. And yet each of the main characters in Star Wars who get burdened with destiny, they all want to go their own way. They want to figure out who they are meant to be, and they try to make their own choices. So there's tension between destiny and on a philosophical, perhaps a theological as well level, it's the age-old question between free will and preordained destiny or determined. But when you look at this from a conflict level, we also have some of that in our field. And what we have in our field is the notion that's pretty well accepted throughout the conflict field, that when we engage in conflict, we each tend to have one default mode from which we engage in conflict. It's not that that's the only way we can behave, but that's the way we do tend to behave unless we make an effort to behave otherwise. And particularly since the 70s, in which Thomas and Kilman created their instrument and created the notion of conflict modes, and sort of put it on a chart, which, concretized it, like that's the way you can make anything truth in academia. And they said, when you put together someone's natural degree of assertiveness and cooperativeness, then you get basically 5 different modes of natural engaging in conflict. And those modes we're familiar with, there some people accommodate and some people avoid conflict, others tend to compromise, some compete, and some cooperate. A lot of our work in conflict is sort of bringing people towards cooperation. But even before we get started on all that, there's the notion that these things are personality traits, right? They're not easily changeable. These are our default modes. And a lot of our work in conflict is unhooking people from their personality-based modes and offering them the notion of doing something else. So in the book, one thing I did is I identified, sort of giving examples of different characters' conflict modes. So for those of you who remember Luke's Uncle Owen, he's a natural avoider. He doesn't want any part of any conflict. And if you remember C-3PO, he is a natural accommodator. It's like he keeps looking for opportunities to surrender. And this stands out because in Star Wars, there are very few people who are avoiders or accommodators. It's about wars. It's not about people who prefer to hide under a table. So C-3PO does that often. That's his programming. And on the other hand, we know the best example of competitor is Anakin Skywalker. As a boy, he was very, very competitive. As a young man, and as a Jedi Knight, he would fight with anybody about anything, including his best friend, his loved one, his teacher, anybody. Every conversation was a competition. And then he became Darth Vader, who would force choke you at the bat of an eyelid if you didn't agree with him. So that's his personality. In the book I wrote, and I'll read just a short bit, these hardwired personality traits guide our go-to responses in conflict situations. However, are these traits insurmountable, like C-3PO's basic programming against impersonating a deity? Or can we unhook ourselves from default programming? Can we bypass our own compressor, so to speak, and choose to act otherwise in specific situations? This question has particular importance for negotiation. Negotiation is often an effort to resolve a conflict situation. Interestingly, even without a conflict, people often experience negotiation with others as a conflict-like interaction. Like Hans Blaster, sometimes we're triggered inappropriately. So negotiating at home with friends on the job, our default conflict mode, and not say a deliberate cognitive decision-making process attuned to the specific context at hand, often determines our response. So if our boss says, I'm not sure I can give you the full raise you're asking for, there's a part of our brain that might roar, if you're not with me, you're the enemy, and we light up our lightsabers. Negotiation requires strategizing, choosing between tactics, considering options, other aspects of deliberate decision-making. In short, to negotiate well, we must choose. But is such choice possible, given the power of our default conflict mode? Yes. Truly wonderful the mind of a human is. Hardwiring notwithstanding, we can bypass default reactions to strategically decide our course in action, even in the most conflict-laden situations. But how? Throughout Star Wars, protagonists struggle between their hardwired conflict modes and their ability to choose other approaches. Their successes and failure, like our own in negotiation, depend on managing this tension. Spoiler, it doesn't always go well. So the rest of the chapter then poses situations in which Star Wars characters switched from their default personality-based mode to a strategic-based choice. And the best example of this, very briefly, is in another scene that all of you are familiar with. It's the scene in which Darth Vader reveals himself to be Luke's father. And he has Luke at the point of a lightsaber, and he could kill him or capture him in a moment. And yet suddenly he switches to cooperative negotiation, even to interest-based negotiation. And he starts persuading him, join me and I'll complete your training. Join me and we'll rule the galaxy together as father and son. Strategically, he changes from his personality-based mode of competition to his strategic-based negotiation mode, contextually chosen, of cooperation. And in the chapter, there are many more examples of how this is done. So that's my chapter. Jen, what else have we got?
Okay, so my chapter is about mediation. So this is not a common dispute resolution method in the Star Wars saga. In fact, we didn't have any people offer to write chapters on mediation in our book, so I decided I would go ahead and write it. It makes sense that mediation isn't a big part of Star Wars, considering the power disparities, considering the good versus evil value conflicts setup of the entire saga. Disputes in Star Wars are usually settled through violence, and this means they're not settled through talking. So that doesn't mean, though, that the story doesn't have mediation adjacent impulses. So I'm going to read a little section from my chapter, but let me just to get us all in the spirit of this. Here you go. I will have a beautiful background. Okay. So, looking for mediation in Star Wars thus raises the challenge that all people in conflict face: how to figure out whether and how mediative approaches and values can be helpful in a particular conflict, given that our own view of the situation tends to dictate what we think is true and tends to narrow what we think is possible. Star Wars itself explores this challenge throughout the saga. The starting point for this exploration is the simple and simplistic idea that the dark side, as represented by the Empire, is malevolent and must be destroyed. The Death Star and its operators cannot be reasoned with. They are a malignance moving through the galaxy, firing when ready. In A New Hope, the only possible response to the Imperial threat is blowing up the Death Star. This same dynamic plays out over the course of the series, with the rebels having no choice but to destroy a second Death Star, and then the Starkiller base, along with numerous large starcraft and massive fleets. Throughout all of these battles between light side and dark side forces, the unspoken understanding is that trying to talk through differences is pointless. But Star Wars quickly complicates this black and white distinction between good and evil. In the original trilogy, we watch Han Solo, a mercenary smuggler, become a loyal friend and leader of the Alliance. The same is true for Lando Calrissian. We also find out that Darth Vader is not just a horrible villain, but he's also the father of both of our heroes, Luke and Leia, for whom he sacrifices his own life. The narrative arc of the original trilogy is therefore not only the triumph of good over evil, but also the redemption and restoration that comes from forgiveness and from the unwavering belief that no one is ever truly lost. The prequels and the final 3 films just reinforce these themes, giving us more insight into the complexities of characters who start off as stereotypes and struggle to become their best selves. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to my friends Jason and Aaron for a little sample from their chapter.
Jason, we should have done something to kind of go with Jen's background here. That's impressive. But no. So this chapter that Jason and I collaborated on started off with an idea that I had, because I've always really, really liked C-3PO as a character. And in Star Wars, you know, I've always had the affinity for a lot of those characters that maybe make a contribution, but they're not always the initial characters that you think of that people are, you know, that are their favorites. You know, another one that comes to mind that I really like is like, you know, Biggs Darklighter or Wedge Antilles or something like that. And so C-3PO was definitely that for me. And I also had the idea when I came to Jason that there might not be a whole lot of people that would write about C-3PO. And so I'm so glad for a venue like this that we ended up, and he helped me kind of flesh out some more of the ideas to bring it all together. And what we ended up writing on, and Noam kind of alluded to it initially, was this idea of how C-3PO grows and becomes more acute with the concept of empathy, which seems somewhat, it might be somewhat of a foreign concept to a lot of the droids within the Star Wars universe. But the way that we organized this chapter is, it's one of those facts that C-3PO is one of those characters that actually appears in every single one of the 9 movies, and so of canon. And so we had a lot to, we had a canvas that was definitely thick and rich of a lot of things to play with as far as what we wanted to do. And so the way we organized the chapter of this growth into empathy and even some of the setbacks that C-3PO encounters, we started with this programming phase where we looked at the prequel era. Not only was he built in episode 1, Phantom Menace, as you know, young Anakin was putting the final touches on him, but he was also being exposed to this concept of trying to realize what empathy is, and sometimes struggling and failing with it. And then we move to this awareness phase as we get to the original trilogy era, that as he continues to not only be a part of the galactic battle that's waging between the Empire and the Rebels, but he's also kind of this battle that seems to be existing within his own programming. And then finally, we kind of have this moment where he truly achieves it in the sequel era, the 7, 8, and 9 movies, where he kind of achieves this concept of empathy and what it means. And so this piece that Jason and I are going to tag team and read about here, we kind of, there's a little bit of starting back in the prequel era to kind of showcase where he came from, and then it kind of goes, we kind of bridge to the ending piece a little bit, but we won't spoil all of it. So starting off here in the prequel era, recall the scene in Revenge of the Sith when, after laying waste to the Jedi Temple, Anakin returns to his apartment to check on his wife Padme, because marriage. C-3PO and R2-D2 are present as Anakin kisses Padme and tells her to wait for him. R2-D2 privately shares with C-3PO that he is concerned about Anakin's mental state. The golden droid affirms his astromech counterparts, agreeing that Anakin is under a great deal of stress. After Anakin leaves, C-3PO approaches Padme, recognizing she is distraught, and asks if there's anything he can do. It is clear that C-3PO grasps the toll these events are having on all involved and wants to be a third-party ally in whatever way he can. When Padme declines his offer, C-3PO responds forlornly, "I feel so helpless." So then, not too long after these events that are pretty cataclysmic, but 20 years pass, and the final remnants of the Old Republic are swept away, replaced by a galactic empire in firm control of known space. C-3PO is now at the center of a nascent alliance of rebels on a mission of galactic proportion.
Skipping ahead a bit in the storyline. Another 30 years later, C-3PO again returns to the galactic stage after what we presume to have been some serious personal and professional development. Not only does he sport a red arm in solidarity with the lost friend, C-3PO now has upgraded his fluency with an additional 1 million forms of communication. Although the basic drivers of conflict might remain invariant over time, the reality is that each generation is faced by a unique set of challenges influenced by the context of history. C-3PO thus ensures his ability to engage with conflict through his ongoing growth. And moving forward one more time, after some discussion and no small amount of protest, C-3PO is whisked off to the planet Kijimi and the cluttered workshop of Slicer extraordinaire Babu Frick. The good news is that Frick can access the translated Sith inscription from C-3PO's memory banks. The bad news is that doing so will likely result in a complete wiping of C-3PO's memory. In an act of heroic proportion, seeking to end the conflict between the Empire and the Resistance, C-3PO agrees to the procedure. Notably, he does so only after observing aloud that he is taking one last look at his friends. By making it possible to translate the inscription, C-3PO finds a way to transcend his original programming and demonstrate real empathy in working towards the ultimate resolution, essentially saving the galaxy. We should all be so fortunate.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Okay, I think that with that, we are going to, Noam, I think you're going to lead us in a conversation. On the mute.
And in this, I think we can start off by talking amongst us, but of course, if anybody would like to jump in, this would be a good time to start off a bit of that. So, as some of you may know, those of you who have watched more of the Star Wars films, there are loads of robots called droids in the Star Wars universe. However, as you watch the movies, you get the sense that there's an undertone of enmity towards droids, broadcast by a great many of the living, the sentient, the organics in Star Wars. You at first see it coming from humans, and then you start to realize that there are creatures who are friendly towards droids, and there are other creatures in the universe who are far less friendly towards droids. And the first ways this come out is sort of ways that are very familiar from racial distinctions that have been made here in our world, like refusing to serve droids in the local cantina. We don't serve their kind in here. But like a very quick mental shortcut for us remembering those days. And indeed, the Star Wars universe is people that have sort of ambivalent relations with droids, and yet they're all over the place. I think that in our day and age, we're just approaching that stage. Many of us have had different responses to technology over the past 10, 15 years. We had it again at the beginning of COVID. We're having it again now, and we're having it again when we're thinking of the future. So all that to say, Star Wars, conflict, technology, thoughts?
I do think it speaks to a deep a deep anxiety that we've had for a long time. I was just at a bookstore this weekend and I saw a book called AI Doesn't Hate You. We recently, of course, all read the New York Times thing about the AI that it by turns, professed love for the interviewer and then professed to hate the interviewer. And it was just so it's unsettling to think that a mechanical being who can be programmed, who can, exist for a very long time, might have attitude towards you. One of the quotes I was thinking about today from the show was when in Return of the Jedi, Obi-Wan Kenobi describes Darth Vader as more machine now than man. And this is considered a bad thing. He's more machine than man. In fact, he's twisted and evil, and Luke is saying, but I think there's still good in him. And the message from Obi-Wan Kenobi seems to be that when you're more machine than man, you're past helping. So it's yet we find that not to be true of Darth Vader. And but on the other hand, it could be said that it is his sort of humanness that ends up overcoming that evil, twisted machineness that he had become. So anyway, it's as Noam said, there's so many different elements of this particular issue to discuss. I want to be sure that Jason and Aaron get a chance to weigh in. And anybody.
I'll just offer, Qui-Gon Jinn has been on my mind a lot. And I think of a relevant scene where he says to Jar Jar Binks, who in all fairness I think was underrated, if not the best character. Poor Jar Jar. But to paraphrase, speech does not connote intelligence. I have two thoughts about that as relevant to this. And I know we'll get to C-3PO, of course, but first thought is, well, psychologically, that's absolutely incorrect. Speech is one of the best windows into intellectual functioning we know of. But kind of like Noam said, you had brought up, Noam, a couple weeks ago in our back channel email, this notion of Chat-GPT. And of course, I'd been just ignoring the whole thing until you had brought that up. And it's like, well, I should probably catch up on this. And so I did. And it's absolutely fascinating. But, it's still a tool. And it goes to what you said, Jen, about technology maybe is more how we use it than what it is, right? Something like Chat-GPT, like in the field of dispute resolution or anything, it might eventually be able to afford answers, even potentially useful answers. Chat-GPT can already do that as long as you play within its parameter space. But empathy is always going to be required for solutions. And whether that's in a human or whether that's in a droid or some other construct, there's always going to need that capacity to reflect, to have a theory of mind, to more than reiterate its programming.
And that strikes me that's the R2-D2 C-3PO pairing. R2-D2 is always the source of information, right? Whenever you don't know something, plug R2-D2 into the network and he goes bloop, 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 and then tells you the information. But C-3PO, as you interpreted him so well in a way that people had not seen until you did, he is sort of the gaining the empathy in order to complement that. He's not there just to translate R2-D2's information. He's also there for the empathy sides of things. Yeah, Aaron, you wanted to...
Well, kind of as you were saying right there, Noam, and you had mentioned, I'm drawing a blank now, but Luke's Uncle Owen, there's a lot of times because of what C-3PO is inherently programmed as, even Owen in the Outer Rim blows him off and says, I have no need for a protocol droid, but not understanding and realizing truly what C-3PO has within inside him and what he ends up becoming. And so I think in a lot of ways, like this technology, it might be easy to potentially overlook the possibilities of what it can do if coupled in the right arena. And I think that is another thing that 3PO demonstrates a lot of times, even when he has setbacks. And I think of in episode 2, when again you have that dynamic relationship between R2 and him, and they had really just gotten to know each other in that movie, and R2 is squawking at something as they land on Geonosis, and he says, "My obtuse little friend, if they really wanted our help, they would have asked for it," being so sure of himself in that moment. And sometimes I think that we succumb to that as well too. Once we think that we've learned a new skill or have become more comfortable with a piece of technology, then all of a sudden we try to put that out there like, okay, now I've got this, when there's really so much more to learn yet too.
Jen, did you have something you were going to jump in with?
No, I didn't.
Okay.
I mean, I can say something, but I didn't have anything I was going to jump in with. I think that R2 is an interesting character. I think about him a lot in this respect. I think that I think it's a he, I don't know, but R2 is often the solution to the problem. He's without R2, they would have been killed many times over because R2 comes in at Deus Ex Machina style, just saves the day because clearly he can talk to anything and can do anything, even though he's very small. So it's I think that there's like a kind of this interesting tension, this sort of almost schizophrenia in the show around, do we trust technology or do we fear it? And when you think about the way they kind of anthropomorphize the technology in Star Wars, one of the strategies they often use is to make the technology silly. So I'm thinking now of the battle droids and the whole Roger, Roger, and they're just such idiots, and they're just always, I mean, then there's the occasional really scary one that comes along, and destroying everything. But the main ones that we see, and certainly the ones that are talking in the prequels, are dumb. And then R2 is very cute. And then the droids that we see in the later episodes, like BB-8, like the droid in Andor, they're very sweet. They're very kind of, and you want to protect them. They're like puppies. So there's just I think that this it's almost like they're overcompensating for the power of the technology by emphasizing its weak, cute, frail aspects. So anyhow,
I'll just say that there is research being done over the past 10 years and continuing about the notion of using an anthropomorphized droid mediator. Dan Druckmann and a team have been working on this for years, and the notion of, will this be more helpful than a human be just a voice operating without some sort of humanoid shape? So that's already in motion. It's really interesting. Another thing I wanted to comment is like a lot of the resistance that we've experienced in terms of resistance to incorporating technology into the work of dispute resolution has always been to not look at what we're really talking about when we talk about that, but just to say, I don't want robots deciding my case, right? You jump straight to the radical case of robo judges. And so even when you're suggesting something that's really not bad at all, it's easy to jump to that as a straw man, a straw droid, and wipe the whole thing away. But here we are, interestingly, we're sort of at the cusp of which droids might be able to do some things in a far more autonomous way than we've seen before. And we see that in the Star Wars movies, that particularly in the prequels, there were some pretty autonomous droids. General Grievous commanding an army of droid soldiers, and some of those soldiers who you saw in the animated series were pretty autonomous. And here we are suddenly Chat-GPT. So while we know its shortcomings, remember, this is only like the beginning iterations, and already there was a case a couple of weeks ago that we saw a Colombian judge say, inputting the details of the case into it and coming out with a judgment, which they said was, they consulted. But when you think about it, my own take on this is that once technology is invented, it tends to get used. And that's a sovereign thought, including robo-judgy technology, which I have no doubt that we'll be capable of someday soon. In Star Wars, when that happened, sometimes, it led to wonderful developments, and sometimes it led to gazillion battle droids shooting up system after system. And I remember I had a flashback, as Jen was talking before, to an ODR forum 15 years ago in Israel. Carrie Menkel-Meadow joined the forum at this international meeting that was held, and sort of joined it to see sort of what is this whole ODR shtick about, and here are comments from someone who's been with the alternative dispute resolution realm for many, many years, and what input can she give. And I remember her giving a talk about how it's important to remember that technology is neutral, essentially. And it's what you do with it. It's neither good nor bad, it's neutral. And back then I remember thinking, since I read the local newspapers back then, I thought it was strange that she was saying that on the very same day that Terminator 4 was opening in theaters in Israel. And Terminator 4 is a movie in which technology is not neutral. Technology is wiping humanity out. And that's sort of the fear we have. So what we work with is that technology is neutral, it's a tool. But what we fear is that technology is, like Jen said, there's something malignant about it, that it's out to get us. That tension is all over Star Wars. And I think it's all over our practice. And it's certainly all over the practice of the National Center. So more meeting points than we knew.
I remember seeing a talk by, I think, what's his name? David from Mitchell-Hamline.
David Larson.
Yes, he does. And it was a long time ago, and he was doing a talk on, now they weren't AI, but they were automated like nurses that you would speak to at a hospital instead of a real nurse. And one of the things that they did, and I'm bringing this up because Jason and Aaron are here, and we wrote about empathy. One of the things they did was they tried to program this thing so that it would be empathetic. In the experience of it would be empathetic, and because it would say things back to you like, oh, I see, or it would repeat something that you said, or it would, I mean, of course, it's not really being empathetic in the sense of it's not coming from this wellspring of compassion, it's programmed to say these things. But I can remember at the time feeling very uneasy about it. And I wonder what y'all think about empathy. I mean, we're almost at the end of time, so maybe you all could just say a few words here at the end about the capacity for programmed empathy, or if you think if it's like a human domain that could never be replicated.
Empathy is a skill. It's something that's taught and hopefully learned like anything else. Sure, some people are inherently more empathic than others, but listening to your example, Jen, I think of a small child. Though the potential of the wiring is there, but small children beyond hugs tend not to be overly verbally empathic, and also shockingly honest.
Well, to go along in this somewhat humorous way, and to your point, Jen, too, I mean, for any of us that have maybe seen The Big Bang Theory, I always think of, one of the biggest gags in the series is Sheldon trying to understand the concept of empathy, even though he's had multiple times to do it. And his cliched phrase that he always goes back to is when someone's having a tough time, he always does the pats and they're there. It's like, I mean, he's human as far as we know, even though his friends make a comparison of him to 3PO as well in the series. But I still think that maybe even 3PO can sometimes do better than that,
And then so much of what we know about empathy in this world is that sometimes it's more important. The sense of empathy on the part of the empathized person is far more important than whether what happened was a real giving of empathy or just some projection of a shadow of something of empathy. Empathy works when it's received. So we have all been empathized with by computers at this point, on automated call center type things, by flash ups on our computer, and I think we're going to get that more and more. And at some point, who knows? Maybe you'll start feeling good. I mean, even back, I won't open this up, but even those of you who remember Eliza, one of the first programs trying, can we sort of make a bot to provide therapy, quote unquote. there were parts of it that were really effective because it gave a sense of empathy, even though everybody knew it was a program. So there's a lot more to develop along this way, both in general and also, I think, in dispute resolution, where empathy is such a core feature of our work. I think we do need to expand that both to empathy in the human touch sense of it and empathy in the automated sense, and we need to look into that.
So I think we're at time.
Yeah.
People have to go to class, etc. But thank you so much, Leah, and thank you so much, Jason and Aaron, for joining us today. And everybody here, it's been wonderful to see you. I hope that you don't hesitate to reach out if there's anything that you want to talk more about, or if you want to, be involved in our next book. We have a call for papers up at our website.
Glad you said that. The call for papers is up on our website, which Jen can quickly type into the chat as we're talking, because she's much better at I am than multitasking. But we do have a call for papers out. It's a Star Wars tradition that as soon as you put one movie out, you start working on a sequel. So there we are. There's a call for pay, and we'd love to have others in there with us. The Rebel Alliance is always growing. Thanks so much. We're going to end this now because we're at the end of our time. We will hang around if anybody wants to hang around and nerd out Star Wars and conflict resolution with us. But thank you so much, Leah. Thank you, National Center. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Thank you, Noam. Thank you, Jen, and to Jason, and to Aaron, and to Sharon and the press for publishing such an exciting and cutting-edge book. Thank you so much, everyone.